If you had to change the classes on each element just to switch the section color, it's wasting time and complicating site maintenance. And inside components, class changes affect every page, not just the light one. Instead, we can switch the color of any element and all of its children from a single component field. We'll also learn an easy way to animate between themes while keeping hover and active states intact. In our style guide, we have a swatch folder with all the core colors we'll use throughout the site. We also have a theme folder for our site background, text, and border. This can be applied to the whole page or even just a section, and we're leaving the values completely unset so we can define light and dark mode versions for this. We'll also need folders for any types of elements we plan to have. Here I have a button folder with button background, text, and border, and we need to define the hover for this also, so background hover, text hover, border hover. We'll have a solid and outline version, but we don't need two separate folders for this. We can use our one button folder and just change the values dynamically. We also have link here, and I have link text, text hover, and text active. If our links also are going to use a border, we could have border hover and border active also. In our embed, we can target any element that has a data attribute name of data theme and a value of light. When that attribute's set on an element, we'll set its theme background to be swatch light, its theme text to be swatch dark, and its theme border to be dark fade, so dark add an opacity. And then for our button, its background and border will be brand, and its text color can be light. And when we hover it inside of light mode, we'll want its background and border to change to dark, and we'll want its text color to change to light. And for our link, its text color can be dark. When we hover, it'll change to dark fade, and on active, it'll change to brand. Now, we also want to define what our outlines button should look like, but we didn't create variable folders just for that. We can still create variable names though, even if they're not created in the variable panel. So we have our button outlines, and we're just using the same button structure here, but an outline version for all the same things. So our button outline is going to have a transparent background color. Inside of light mode, it'll have dark text and a brand border. When we hover it, its background and border will change to brand, and its text color will change to light. So once we have that set, we can copy all our light mode styles and apply what the dark mode version should be. So we'll set theme dark anytime we have a theme dark attribute attached. We'll switch our theme background to be swatch dark. Our text can be swatch light. The border can be light fade. The button can still have a brand background and light text, but when we hover it inside of dark mode, we'll want the background and border to change to light and the text to change to dark. Our outline button can still have a transparent background, but it'll need light text, a brand border, and when we hover, the background and border can still be brand with light text. And for our link, we'll want the text to be light, the hover of the link to be light fade, and the active can still be brand. Now we just need a way to access these button outline variables since we didn't create them in the variable panel. To do that, we can add an extra line here where we're saying anything with a data button style attribute with a value of outlines. When we have that applied on an element, we'll switch the button background to be the outline button background instead. Button text can be button outline text, so we're replacing all the solid styles with the outline styles instead. Now, if we head over to the body and we give this an attribute of data theme and a value of light, we can start using our variables. So on the body all pages tag, we might set the body background color to be theme background, the body text color to be theme text. We might set the border on these cards to be something like theme border. And we might set this button element here to have a button background and its border color to be button border and its text color to be button text. And whenever we hover this button, we'll want to switch its border to be button border hover, its background here to be button background hover, and its text to be button text hover. So this is for our solid button here, and we can give it a data attribute of data button style solid. And if we want the outline version, all we have to do is switch the attribute to outlined, and it updates all those solid variables with the outline style instead. And we didn't have to change out what we applied on this class. So now we'll set solid as our default. And what's great about this is we can turn it into a component. I'll just call this button, And then we can link its style to a component field. And we'll just call this component field something like button style. The default will be solid. And let's create. So now we can use the same button component and just change certain instances of it to have the outline style instead. And we can use these same themes across play buttons, slider arrows, any kind of buttons we have throughout our site. And even if we switch the whole body over to a dark mode, then these are also updating as well. So that's all good to go. Now, what happens if we don't have an attribute attached to the body? We'll want to set what the default should be. So if we look at this right now, if we want it light to be the default, we could add root comma, and that just means if no attribute is attached to the body on the root HTML element, the default will receive all of the light styles. So with no attribute attached, notice how all the styles are light by default. If we move root over to the dark, then with no attribute attached, the page will be dark by default. And of course, we could always add the attribute to the body to switch it back to being light. But in this case, we'll leave the default theme to be light. Now, what if we want our whole page to be light by default, but this one section to be dark? We could give this section a data theme attribute with a value of dark, and that makes the button styles correct, but the section itself never actually had a background color applied, and it's just inheriting from body font color. So each time we apply data theme, we would need to remember to set the theme background and theme text. That way it has its own text and background color. But there's an easier way to handle this. Instead of having to remember to apply that along with the attribute, we could make sure that anything that has a data theme attribute attached automatically gets a background of theme background and font color of theme text. And we'll just exclude anything that has data theme inherit from this, so that if we plug a value of inherit, it won't actually have a background or font color applied. It'll just receive from the body. So if we go ahead and save that, notice without actually having to apply a background color or text color to this, it's receiving it just from this one attribute. We can switch it over to light or back to dark, and these values are completely overridable. So we could set our background to maybe our brand swatch, or we could set it maybe to the dark one at a lower opacity. These are just the defaults that are coming from the data attribute, but we can override it as we please. So this is great because we can make reusable section components. If I grab this whole hero section, I can give it a data theme inherit so that it just inherits from the body style. It doesn't have any sort of background color or anything attached to it whatsoever. If we gave it data theme light, then that means the section would actually have a background color attached, which isn't quite what we want there. So we'll leave the default to inherit. That way it just respects the body's color. And then we can go ahead and make this into a component. I'll call it section/hero. And we can go ahead and link this to a component field. And we'll just call it our theme field for our section. So now we can reuse this same section across multiple pages. And we can choose if we want this section to either inherit from the body's theme, always be dark, or always be light, even if the body itself was set to maybe dark in this case. Then that one section will still be light while the rest of the page is dark. Sometimes we'll want an element to automatically invert based on its parent's theme. To do that, we can start with our light styles here. And here we're saying anytime there's an element with a data theme invert that's inside of a dark theme, give the invert element the light styles when it's inside of that dark theme. And we can do the opposite down here. We can say anytime there's an invert element inside of a light theme, then give that invert element all of the dark styles. So if we save that and we grab this card and we give it a data theme invert, then we should be able to just have that invert based on the parent theme. In this case, it's the body. So if I switch the body over to dark, then this card just inverts. But what if there's no sort of theme on the body whatsoever? We need to define what invert should look like by default. So we know the body is actually going to be light by default. So that means if there's an invert element and there's no sort of parent attribute defined, then we want the invert element to have all of the dark styles by default. So if we save this, now even with no attribute attached on the body, this card is still the correct style. And we can have our dark section here. The card is light. It's just automatically inverting. And what's great about this is we can turn this whole card into a component where we have the cards inheriting from their parent section theme by default. And I'll just create a card component here, and I'll link this to a field called theme on the card. And that way we can just reuse the same card component for all of our cards and set only the first one to be invert or light or dark or whatever we want it to be, just like so. Now, currently animating variable values with Webflow interactions really isn't that usable. Even if we have this set to only affect the interaction trigger, the navbar, animating this theme background doesn't just change the navbar, it's changing every instance of that theme background throughout the whole site. And there's no way to link this color to a global swatch, so it won't be consistent with future updates. So we want our navbar to start off in dark mode with a transparent background, and when we scroll down, we want it to animate to light mode with a filled-in background. So to do that, inside our Webflow, we'll select the entire navbar and we'll give it a data attribute of data theme with a value of light, so all the light mode variables are applied to this element by default. And then instead of setting a background color of theme background on the nav, we'll switch it to a background of transparent. And we have this absolute sort of background div inside that's covering the full nav. And we'll go ahead and give this div a background color of theme background. So that'll either be dark or light depending on the theme it's in. And when we're at the top of the page, we'll turn the opacity on this div down. When we scroll down, we'll turn the opacity up, and the entire navbar will animate from dark to light mode. So to do this, we can head over to our page, and here I've added GSAP and GSAP scroll trigger so we can animate the color themes. This script here is something we can include just once right here at the top, and what it's going to do is grab all the light mode and dark mode variables from the page code color embed, and it'll just store them in this color theme. So any future variables we add to the embed, any future themes we add, will automatically be added in here. And then to animate it, it's really simple. We can select the element we want to animate on, the navbar, and choose to either animate it to theme 2, which is the second theme in our embed, dark mode, or theme 1, which is our light mode. If we had a third theme, like a brand theme, we could pass that in too. And any other future variables we add to light and dark mode, like maybe a card color or anything like that, will be automatically included in here. It's catching all of those variables. And we can add other timelines, other GSAP animations, targeting other elements. So maybe we say on hover of a card, we animate that card from its default light mode to a dark mode, or vice versa. We give it a default dark mode and animate it to light mode. So we can really easily animate all our variables on any elements we want in an efficient way. So here our trigger is the body. Whenever the top of body is at top of screen, our endpoint is when 100 pixels past the top of body reaches the top of screen. So after we scroll down by 100 pixels, we're going to play. And when we scroll back up, we will reverse. And we're just animating the navbar from a dark theme back to the light theme that we set in Webflow. And we're animating that background element from 0 opacity back to the full opacity. That way, when we're scrolling in designer view, we get to see this navbar in light mode. We get to see it with the solid background div. But whenever we publish, those initial states of a transparent background and dark mode will be set with GSAP because we're using a from animation. So if we go ahead and open this up, notice we're at the top of the page with a transparent background. Everything is inside of this sort of dark mode. And when we scroll down, now we're inside light mode and everything's working good. If we had active states or hover states on these links, all that would transition over also.